Lincoln police releasing new information in a murder case here in the capital city. We now know the names of the suspects who were arrested. Saiveon Wright and Gregory Bahati, both of Omaha, were arrested in the shooting death of 7 Hopkins. The homicide happened early morning of September 8th near 11th and P in downtown Lincoln. Police say several fights broke out that night, leading Hopkins to get fatally shot in the chest.
September 8th, 2024, 1:07 a.m. downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. A 24-year-old father collapses on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him. His cousin, the person he just saved, is screaming his name. The shooter? Already running to a black Honda Pilot, disappearing into the night. What would you do to protect the ones you love? Would you step between your family and danger, even if it meant risking everything? Saiveon Hopkins didn't hesitate. He saw his cousin in trouble and moved without thinking. 30 seconds later, he was dying on the street outside a birthday party that was supposed to be a celebration. But here's what makes this case absolutely insane. Saiveon wasn't involved in any of the fights that broke out that night. He wasn't beefing with anyone. He was just there, enjoying time with family. And the 2 men responsible? They traveled from another city specifically for this moment. One pointed, one pulled the trigger. And by the time police arrived, a rising star, a father, an artist, a man grinding to build something better, was gone. Welcome to True Crime Malice, where we don't just tell stories, we demand justice and honor the lives stolen too soon. But real quick, drop your city in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this story is about to take you on a ride you won't forget. Trust me. You're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now let's talk about who Saiveon Hopkins really was, because the media headlines don't tell you half the story. Saiveon was born June 21, 2000 in Ontario, Canada. But he spent most of his life in Lincoln, Nebraska, a city where opportunity doesn't exactly knock on your door. You've got to chase it down, and that's exactly what he did. Growing up wasn't easy. His older brother got pulled into gang life early, and that shadow hung over their household. Saiveon tried to stay on the straight path. He was a high school basketball star, quick on his feet, competitive as hell, and hungry to prove himself. For a while, it looked like sports might be his ticket out, but the streets have a way of pulling you in, even when you're trying to resist. By his early 20s, Saiveon found himself caught up in the same world his brother knew too well. In 2022, he got arrested for possession of a stolen firearm. That arrest could have been the beginning of the end. Instead, it became his wake-up call. After that, Saiveon made a decision. He wasn't going to let his past define his future. He started pouring everything into his music, rapping under his own name, and telling stories that reflected his reality. The struggles, the losses, the grind. His lyrics weren't just entertainment. They were survival, therapy, and ambition, all wrapped into one. But music alone wasn't paying the bills, so Saiveon got certified as a veneer technician, diving into cosmetic dentistry. He posted about it on social media, proud as hell, showing off his certificate and talking about his transition from dental assistant training to specializing in composite resin veneers. He even joked around in videos, working on people's teeth while keeping the energy light. That was Saiveon, always working, always moving, always finding another way to make money. And then there was his work as Jay Hefner. Yeah, Saiveon was also an adult film star and content creator on OnlyFans. He modeled, built a massive social media following, and became a brand ambassador for companies like Fashion Nova and Rockstar Original. Some people might judge that hustle, but here's the thing. Saiveon didn't care what anyone thought. He was confident, bold, and willing to do what others wouldn't to secure the bag. In one of his last interviews, he said it straight up. I do everything. I rap, I model, I'm in management, OnlyFans, all that. Everything except dance. I don't dance. That line right there, that was Saiveon. No shame, no apologies, just a man doing what he had to do. But here's what a lot of people don't know. Saiveon's mother was sick. Really sick. Medical bills were piling up and he felt the weight of that responsibility. He wasn't just hustling for himself. He was hustling to keep his mom alive, to give her the care she needed. That's the kind of son he was. And then there was his daughter, Abigail, 10 months old, the center of Saiveon's entire universe. If you scrolled through his social media, you'd see her everywhere, smiling in his arms, playing while he worked, looking up at him like he was her whole world. Because he was. Every decision Saiveon made, every late night, every hustle, every risk, it was all for her. He wanted to give Abigail the kind of life he never had: stability, opportunity, love without limits. Saiveon was also in a relationship with Madeline Murchison. She described him as her safe place, the person who showed her what real love looked like. After his death, she posted about how the news shattered her, how she couldn't imagine life without him. That's the kind of partner he was: present, protective, and deeply committed. Saiveon wasn't perfect. He had a past, he made mistakes, but he was trying, really trying to build something better. And just when it seemed like everything was coming together, just when his daughter was starting to recognize his face, and his music was gaining traction, and his businesses were growing, everything came crashing down. September 7th, 2024, Saturday night, Lincoln, Nebraska. Saiveon Hopkins was in good spirits. He'd made the trip from Ontario specifically for this: a family birthday party at a bar near 11th and O Streets in downtown Lincoln. The place was packed, music thumping, drinks flowing. Family members he hadn't seen in months were all there, laughing, reminiscing, celebrating life. The energy in the bar was electric. People were dancing, taking shots, posting videos on social media. It was one of those nights where everything felt right. No drama, no tension, just pure celebration. But if you've watched enough true crime, you know how fast things can flip. Around midnight, the vibe started shifting. Small disagreements here and there. Someone bumped into someone else, a look held too long, words exchanged that didn't sit right, most people brushed it off. Typical party friction, especially when alcohol's involved. Nothing serious. Except it was about to get very serious. By 12:45 a.m., the tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. Arguments turned into shoving matches. Shoving matches turned into full-blown fights. And not just one fight, multiple altercations breaking out simultaneously in and around the bar. He wasn't involved in any of the fights, he wasn't beefing with anyone, he was literally just there. But then his cousin got caught up in one of the altercations. Now, if you know anything about Saiveon, you know he wasn't the type to stand by and watch family get hurt. His friends described him as the peacemaker, someone who valued harmony, who stepped in when things got heated, who protected the people he loved without hesitation. So when he saw his cousin locked in a confrontation outside the bar, Saiveon didn't think twice. He moved toward them, trying to de-escalate the situation, trying to pull his cousin back to safety. And that's when everything went sideways. Here's where it gets wild. Two men from Omaha, Nebraska, about an hour away, were also in the area that night. Their names, Saiveon Wright, 23 years old, and Gregory Bahati, 30 years old. According to police reports and witness testimony, Wright and Bahati weren't actively involved in the main fights either. They were just there, watching, observing, like they were waiting for something. Bahati had a brief involvement in one of the scuffles, nothing major, just a quick exchange, but then he backed off, he disengaged. And that's when things took a deadly turn. Bahati turned around, his eyes scanned the crowd, and then he locked onto Saiveon Hopkins. Now before I tell you what happens next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you stepped in to help someone and it went completely wrong? Maybe you tried to break up a fight and ended up getting blamed. Maybe you defended a friend and it backfired. Drop your story in the comments, I want to hear about it. And if you're feeling this video so far, go ahead and smash that like button, it helps more than you know. Alright, back to the story. Bahati is standing there, looking directly at Saiveon. And then, According to multiple witnesses and video evidence that would later surface, Bahati raised his arm and pointed straight at Saiveon Hopkins. 3 words came out of his mouth. Shoot him. That's it, just 3 words. Cold, deliberate, final. Standing behind Saiveon was Saiveon Wright, and in that moment Wright reached into his waistband, pulled out a firearm, and, without hesitation, fired at least 2 shots. Bang. Bang. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife. People who were fighting immediately stopped. Everyone started running, screaming, ducking for cover. Saiveon Hopkins was hit in the chest. The impact dropped him instantly. He collapsed onto the pavement, blood spreading beneath him. A 40-year-old bystander, someone who had nothing to do with any of this, was also struck by the gunfire. He went down too, clutching his side. Saiveon's cousin, the person he'd just been trying to protect, dropped to their knees beside him. They were screaming his name, pressing their hands against the wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding, but there was so much blood. Too much. Wright didn't stick around. He turned and bolted, weaving through the panicked crowd. Witnesses saw him jump into a black 2021 Honda Pilot parked a few blocks away. The car peeled out, tires squealing, and disappeared into the night. Bahati, also gone. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. Lincoln Police Department officers arrived on scene to absolute pandemonium. People were still running, some were crying, others were trying to explain what happened, but everyone had a different version of events. Paramedics rushed to Saiveon. They worked on him right there on the street, doing everything they could to stabilize him. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. They loaded him into an ambulance and raced toward the hospital, lights flashing, sirens blaring. The 40-year-old bystander was also transported. His injuries, thankfully, were non-high-threatening. He'd survive. But Saiveon, doctors at the hospital fought hard. They did everything in their power. But the damage was catastrophic. The bullet had torn through vital organs. There was too much internal bleeding. At 2:47 a.m. on September 8, 2024, Saiveon Hopkins was pronounced dead. 24 years old, a father, an artist, a son, a protector, gone. His family started arriving at the hospital one by one. His mother, Jeannie Brown, collapsed when she got the news. His girlfriend, Madeline, couldn't even speak. His cousin, the one he'd saved, was inconsolable, drowning in guilt and grief. And back home in Ontario, Saiveon's 10-month-old daughter Abigail had no idea that her father was never coming back. The question everyone was asking, why? Why did this happen? Who were these men? What did Saiveon do to deserve this? The answer? Absolutely nothing. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to do the right thing. But here's where this case gets even crazier. Because while Saiveon's family was mourning, while the community was reeling, while candlelight vigils were being planned and hashtags were trending, investigators were already piecing together a trail that would lead them straight to the killer. And what they found on those surveillance cameras, it was about to blow this case wide open. The hours after Saiveon's death were a blur of grief, confusion, and rage. His mother, Jeannie Brown, couldn't process it. Just hours earlier, her son had been alive, smiling, celebrating with family. Now she was being told he was gone, shot down in the street like his life meant nothing. She kept asking the same question over and over. Why? Why my baby? There was no good answer. Madeline Murchison, Saiveon's girlfriend, posted a heartbreaking message on social media. She talked about how he was her safe place, the person who made her feel protected and loved in ways she'd never experienced before. "I don't know how to exist in a world without you," she wrote. The post went viral, with thousands of people sharing their condolences and demanding justice. But the person carrying the heaviest burden? Saiveon's cousin, the one he died protecting. Imagine living with that. Imagine knowing that someone you love took bullets meant for you, that they stepped in front of danger because they couldn't stand the thought of you getting hurt, and now they're gone, and you're still here. And then there was Abigail, 10 months old, too young to understand that her father wasn't coming home, too young to remember his face, his voice, the way he held her. She'd grow up hearing stories about Saiveon Hopkins, but she'd never actually know him. That reality crushed everyone who loved him. The news of Saiveon's death spread fast. Social media exploded. Justice for Saiveon started trending. People who'd never met him were posting tributes, sharing his music, talking about how senseless his murder was. On Tuesday evening, just days after the shooting, a candlelight vigil was held near the site where Saiveon was killed. Hundreds of people showed up, family, friends, fans, complete strangers who just felt compelled to be there. One speaker said, "Seven grew up here in Lincoln. He always had a smile on his face. Always. And this senseless tragedy should never have happened. We can't keep losing our young people like this." The vigil was emotional, raw, and powerful, but underneath all that grief was something else: anger. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted the people responsible for Saiveon's death to pay. And that's where the Lincoln Police Department came in. From the moment officers arrived at the scene on September 8th, they knew this case was going to be complicated. Multiple fights, dozens of witnesses, conflicting stories, and two suspects who'd already vanished. But investigators had something crucial: video footage, lots of it. Downtown Lincoln, especially around the Bar District, is covered in surveillance cameras, security cameras from businesses, traffic cameras, and perhaps most importantly, cell phone videos from people who were at the party. Detectives started collecting everything they could. They pulled footage from every camera within a 3-block radius. They interviewed witnesses, and I'm talking dozens of people, each with their own perspective on what went down that night. The problem? When you've got that many people involved in that much chaos, stories don't always line up. Some people saw the shooting but couldn't identify the shooter. Others heard the gunshots but didn't see where they came from. A few people had clear views but were too scared to come forward initially. This is where good detective work separates the amateurs from the professionals. Investigators started building a timeline. They mapped out every fight, every movement, every person who was in the area. They cross-referenced witness statements with video footage, looking for consistencies and contradictions. And slowly, a picture started to emerge. They identified Saiveon on camera, moving through the crowd, clearly trying to stay out of trouble. They saw his cousin get into an altercation. They watched Saiveon step in, trying to pull his cousin back. And then they saw two men who didn't quite fit the scene: Saiveon Wright and Gregory Bahati. They weren't from Lincoln, they didn't seem to know most of the people at the party, and their behavior was off. They weren't really engaging with anyone, they were just watching, waiting. Detectives zeroed in on them. Frame by frame, investigators tracked their movements. They watched Bahati get briefly involved in a scuffle, then back away. They saw him turn, scan the crowd, and lock eyes on Saiveon Hopkins. And then came the moment that would crack this case wide open. On one of the surveillance videos, clear as day, you can see Bahati raise his arm and point directly at Saiveon. His mouth moves, and though there's no audio, witnesses who were close enough confirmed what he said: "Shoot him." Behind Saiveon, Saiveon Wright reaches into his waistband, pulls out a firearm, and fires. Twice. Saiveon drops, the bystander goes down, Wright runs. Investigators now had their suspects, but they needed to find them. They started digging into Wright and Bahati's backgrounds. Both men were from Omaha, Nebraska, about an hour northwest of Lincoln. Both had connections to gang activity, though police were still working to determine if this shooting was gang or something more personal. Here's where the investigation got really interesting. Detectives pulled traffic camera footage from the highways between Omaha and Lincoln. They were looking for that black Honda Pilot that witnesses saw Wright jump into after the shooting. And they found it. The car was registered to a family member of Gregory Bahati, and surveillance footage showed that same vehicle leaving Omaha around 11 p.m. on September 7th, heading toward Lincoln. After the shooting, cameras captured it speeding back toward Omaha in the early morning hours of September 8th. But investigators didn't stop there. They pulled footage from Wright's neighborhood in Omaha, and what they found was damning. At approximately 11 p.m. on September 7th, Saiveon Wright left his residence wearing a specific outfit, a dark hoodie, jeans, and white sneakers. That same outfit matched exactly what the shooter was wearing in the Lincoln surveillance footage. The black Honda Pilot picked him up. It drove him to Lincoln. He shot Saiveon Hopkins, and then the car brought him right back home. But even with all this evidence, investigators moved carefully. They needed airtight warrants, they needed to coordinate with law enforcement in Omaha, and they needed to make sure that when they moved on these suspects, there'd be no mistakes. Weeks passed. Saiveon's family was getting frustrated. Why weren't there any arrests? Why was this taking so long? Behind the scenes, though, detectives were building an ironclad case. A family friend organized a GoFundMe campaign to help cover funeral costs and support Saiveon's daughter. The goal was $25,000. Within days, it had raised over $29,000, with donations still pouring in. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, but it also kept pressure on law enforcement to deliver justice. Jeannie Brown, Saiveon's mother, gave interviews. She refused to let her son's story fade away. "They took my baby from me," she said through tears, "and I won't rest until they pay for what they did." The community rallied. Local activists organized marches. Churches held prayer services. Saiveon's music started getting more streams as people discovered his work and wanted to honor his memory. And then, on October 15, 2024, more than a month after Saiveon's death, everything came together. Arrest warrants were issued for Saiveon Wright and Gregory Bahadi. But investigators didn't just want warrants. They wanted to execute them perfectly. So they coordinated with multiple agencies: the Lincoln Police Department, the Omaha Police Department's SWAT team, gang unit, and homicide units, plus the United States Marshals Fugitive Task Force. This was about to be a major operation. And at 6 a.m. on October 16, 2024, they made their move. Gregory Bahadi was still asleep when he heard the pounding on his door. "Police! Search warrant! Open up!" Before he could even process what was happening, the door came crashing in. Omaha PD SWAT team flooded his residence, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Bahadi was pulled from his bed, thrown to the ground, and cuffed before he could say a word. While Bahadi was being processed, another team was moving on Saiveon Wright. Wright wasn't home when they hit his residence that morning, but investigators had been tracking his movements. They knew his patterns, his associates, where he liked to hang out. It was only a matter of time. Around noon, Wright was located in Douglas County. Officers moved in fast. He tried to play it cool at first, acting confused about why they were there, but when they slapped the cuffs on him and read him his charges, reality hit. First-degree murder, use of a firearm to commit a felony, 2 counts of second-degree assault. Wright's face went pale. During the search of both residences, investigators seized multiple weapons, 2 handguns and a rifle. Ballistics tests would later determine if any of these were the murder weapon, but even without that, the evidence against Wright and Bahadi was overwhelming. By early afternoon, both suspects were in custody at the Lancaster County Jail in Lincoln. The news broke fast. Local media outlets ran the story. Social media exploded. Saiveon's family finally had the news they'd been waiting over a month to hear. "We got them," Jeannie Brown said, tears streaming down her face. "We finally got them." But getting arrested is one thing, facing a judge is another. On October 17th, Wright and Bahadi appeared in Lancaster County Court for their arraignment. The courtroom was packed. Saiveon's family, friends, media, and curious onlookers all crammed in to see the men accused of killing him. Wright walked in first, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery. You could feel the tension in the room. Some of Saiveon's family members were crying. Others were staring daggers at him, their anger barely contained. Bahati came in next. Unlike Wright, he looked around the courtroom, almost defiant, like he didn't fully grasp the severity of what he was facing. The judge read the charges aloud. For Saiveon, Wright. First-degree murder. Use of a firearm to commit a felony. 2 counts of second-degree assault. For Gregory Bahati. Aiding and abetting first-degree murder. Aiding and abetting use of a firearm to commit a felony. Aiding and abetting 2 counts of second-degree assault. The prosecution laid out their case in broad strokes. They had surveillance footage showing Bahati pointing at Saiveon and giving the order. They had video of Wright pulling the trigger. They had the getaway vehicle tracked from Omaha to Lincoln and back. They had witnesses. They had digital evidence. They had everything. Wright's attorney tried to argue for bond, claiming his client wasn't a flight risk and had ties to the community. The judge wasn't buying it. Bahati's attorney made a similar argument, suggesting that his client's involvement was minimal and that he didn't actually pull the trigger. Again, the judge shut it down. Bond denied for both defendants. They'd be staying in jail until trial. The courtroom erupted in applause from Saiveon's supporters. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but you could see he understood the emotion in the room. After the hearing, prosecutors held a press conference outside the courthouse. They walked through the timeline of the investigation, explaining how they'd identified the suspects and built their case. The investigator emphasized that this wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a random act of violence. This was deliberate. Bahati gave the order, Wright executed it, and Saiveon Hopkins paid the price. But here's what still wasn't clear: the motive. Why did Bahati want Saiveon dead? Did they have history? Was there bad blood between them? Was this gang? Or was Saiveon simply in the wrong place when Bahati decided he wanted to make a statement? Investigators were still working to answer those questions. They were looking into possible gang connections, past interactions between the men, and whether there'd been any earlier conflict that night that escalated to murder. What they did know was this: Wright and Bahati traveled from Omaha to Lincoln that night. They weren't there for the party, they weren't celebrating anyone's birthday, they came with a purpose. And when the opportunity presented itself, when chaos erupted and Saiveon stepped forward to protect his cousin, Bahati saw his chance and took it. The prosecution made it clear they'd be seeking the maximum penalties. In Nebraska, first-degree murder carries a potential sentence of life in prison. With the firearm enhancement and the additional assault charges, Wright was looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars. Bahati, even though he didn't pull the trigger, was facing nearly identical charges under aiding and abetting statutes. In the eyes of the law, ordering someone to commit murder is just as culpable as doing it yourself. Both men entered pleas of not guilty. Their attorneys signaled they'd be fighting the charges, likely arguing self-defense or claiming the prosecution's evidence didn't prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. But anyone who'd seen the surveillance footage knew how weak those defenses would be. You can't claim self-defense when you're standing behind someone and shoot him in the back. You can't argue lack of intent when there's video of you pointing at the victim and saying, "Shoot him." This case was as close to open and shut as they come. Still, trials take time, months, sometimes years. And in the meantime, Saiveon's family would have to wait for true justice. Outside the courthouse after the arraignment, Jeannie Brown spoke to reporters. Her voice was shaky but determined. "My son was a good man," she said. "He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He was working hard, taking care of his baby, helping me with my medical bills, and these men took him from us. For no reason at all." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "I want them to rot in prison for what they did. I want them to feel a fraction of the pain we're feeling. And I want the world to remember Saiveon Hopkins not as a victim, but as a father, an artist, and a protector who died doing what he thought was right." The arrest brought some measure of closure, but they also raised more questions. Questions about violence, about choices, about how a night of celebration could end in such tragedy. And those questions, they're what we need to talk about next. So Wright and Bahati are behind bars. The evidence is solid. Justice is moving forward. But there's still one massive question hanging over this entire case. Why? So what triggered Bahati to single him out? Investigators are still working to answer that question definitively, but let's walk through the theories that have emerged. Saiveon had a past. We know his older brother was deep in gang life. We know Saiveon himself got arrested in 2022 for possession of a stolen firearm. Even though he'd been working to turn his life around, those connections don't just disappear. This one's harder to swallow, but it happens more often than you'd think. What if Bahati thought Saiveon was someone else? What if, in the chaos and darkness and adrenaline of multiple fights breaking out, he mistook Saiveon for a rival or someone he had actual beef with? Maybe something happened earlier in the night that we don't know about. A bump in the crowded bar, a look that lasted too long, a comment that was overheard and taken the wrong way. Here's another angle. What if this wasn't about Saiveon at all? What if the real target was his cousin, the person he was protecting, and Saiveon just got in the way? This is the darkest possibility and, honestly, the hardest to accept. What if there was no motive? What if Bahati was just caught up in the chaos, high on adrenaline and violence, and decided to escalate things for no reason other than he could? Right now, investigators are still digging. They're interviewing associates of Wright and Bahati. They're looking into social media activity leading up to the shooting. They're checking for any prior interactions between the men. As the case moves toward trial, more details will likely emerge. Prosecutors will present their theory of motive, defense attorneys will try to poke holes in it, and hopefully, the truth will come out. But here's what we know for certain. Saiveon Hopkins didn't deserve this. He wasn't a perfect person. He had a complicated past. But on the night of September 7th, 2024, he was just a man trying to protect his family. That's it. And for that, he was murdered in cold blood. The cruel irony is that the quality that defined Saiveon, his instinct to protect others, is exactly what put him in the line of fire. If he'd stayed back, if he'd let his cousin handle their own fight, if he'd just walked away, he'd probably still be alive. But that wasn't who Saiveon was. He couldn't stand by and watch someone he loved get hurt, even if it meant putting himself at risk. That's heroism. That's love. And that's what makes his death so devastating. As this case moves forward, as Wright and Bahati sit in jail awaiting trial, Saiveon's family is left with more questions than answers. They want to know why. They deserve to know why. But even if they get a clear motive, even if prosecutors lay out exactly what happened and why, it won't bring Saiveon back. It won't give Abigail her father. It won't heal the hole in Jeannie Brown's heart. Justice can punish the guilty, but it can't undo the damage. And that's the harsh reality of cases like this. You can arrest the killers, you can convict them, you can lock them away forever, but the person you lost, they're still gone. So what do we do with that? How do we make sense of senseless violence? How do we honor victims like Saiveon while also working to prevent the next tragedy? That's what we need to talk about, because this isn't just about one murder in Lincoln, Nebraska. This is about a pattern of violence that's claiming young lives every single day across this country. And if we're serious about change, we need to confront some uncomfortable truths. Let's be real. Saiveon Hopkins isn't the first young man killed in senseless violence, and tragically, he won't be the last. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for black men aged 15 to 34 in America. Not car accidents, not disease, guns. Every single day, families are getting that devastating phone call. Every single day, another father, brother, or son isn't coming home. What actually prevents this? Community intervention programs like Cure Violence treat gun violence as a public health crisis, not just a crime problem. They use former gang members as mediators who step in before conflicts turn deadly. We also need accessible resources for conflict resolution and trauma care. But here's the hard truth. Change requires all of us caring enough to demand it. Saiveon Hopkins was more than a headline. He was a father, grinding multiple jobs for his daughter, an artist pouring his truth into music, a son hustling to pay his mother's medical bills, a partner who made his girlfriend feel safe, a protector who died doing what he believed was right. What we can do is remember him, share his story, demand change. Rest in power, Saiveon 7, Hopkins.